What if we could learn from outstanding leaders in business, sports, and education from some of the best voices in corporate America? Lighting the Path is a series of interviews with industry leaders whose stories highlight strategies that build purpose-driven cultures, engage and retain top talent, develop drivers that create high-performance teams, and connect people to the vision of your company. Join us to hear from game-changing, talented leaders whose paths make a difference at work and at home.
Ralph Spect is the author of Building a Corporate Soul. And when I first heard the title of his new book that just came out, I had to visit with him. And I tell you what, I wasn't disappointed. See, he's developed a soul system, which is a framework that powers culture and success in any size of business. And I'm anxious to hear him talk because after 2 decades with McCann Erickson, a global leader in marketing in various executive roles, he was a founding partner of Spark 44, which is an innovative industry-first joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover. Under his leadership as CEO, Spark 44 grew to 1,200 people with businesses in 18 countries. His driving vision is to make soulless corporations a thing of the past. Welcome, Ralph Spect.
I was lucky twice. Lucky first time because there was someone in our team who volunteered to bridge the gap between the first leader leaving and until we found somebody new. And secondly, I was lucky because we went through a huge process of finding the right person. And I said, well, you do me a big favor, you find that person, but I'll have a veto right. And the first one that they came up with, I vetoed. I said, all the hard facts are perfect, but I don't think the person's fully understood the culture that we want to set up here. I don't think it's going to work. And so the recruiter went back, wasn't too happy, but actually 4 weeks later, the ideal person was identified and she came on board and she's been become a star ever since. So you got to make sure that when you're hiring people, especially in leadership positions, when you're scaling up, the attitudes and the understanding of culture, you really need to check in hard, because the problem is not only is it a problem to find someone, takes a lot of time to find that person. If you then bring him or her in the US is a bit easier because of your short deadlines. You can leave a company in like 2 weeks usually. In Europe, that's not the case. So there's time, and then the person starts, and then the person needs to be onboarded, and only then you see whether it's really working. So you got to focus on the time before making the decision, because you really can't afford a wrong decision challenge you for too long.
Yeah, because you bang into the challenge of time and productivity, and it's not the person's productivity, but you put the square peg in a round hole. Especially for a culture-driven organization, it literally undermines there's a huge impact that they have on the organization, the flow. And I would think from a scaling standpoint, one of the issues you had to deal with when you went from 60 to 240, from 240 to 1,200, the challenge you had to run into was how do you bring communication, as you're scaling, to be able to maintain the culture. Was there anything that y'all put into place to help make sure that you were communicating effectively, not only amongst the leadership team, but through the leadership down to the rank and file who are actually boots on the ground?
Absolutely. I think, this is now 10 years back or 11 years back, and we were having these conversations on a Zoom meeting. Back in 2011, I don't even think Zoom existed.
No, it did not.
We used GoToMeeting at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when we hired people, because obviously we had a constraint because we had these 4 offices, we had five founders. So there was someone in every key location, but we basically we met a few times over the course of the year, but there wasn't well, let me just come into your office and let's.
Yeah, it wasn't hallway chats as you're bumping elbows. Yeah.
Didn't happen. So whenever we brought in people, they were always blown away by the use of technology, which today is completely normal, like FaceTime on the iPhone and go to meetings. What we worked hard in the first years, and I continued until I left, was to have face-to-face conversations in each office for each leader for a number of times. Obviously, larger offices more often than smaller offices, but I've been to Shanghai every 3 months. I've been to New York and LA at least twice a year, perhaps 3 times a year. London and Birmingham very close, obviously, basically my second home for quite a while, but also places that you wouldn't normally go to because just so far away. You got to make the effort to do it. So Australia, probably the farthest from all, or even Latin America, Sao Paulo and others. But obviously doing these sessions are great, they're rewarding, but you always have, as a leader, have to be clear about, well, it's like you're coming into town for a concert and then you're gone. So there's a 1 day or 2 day experience and you got to make the most of it, but you got to find a way to make sure that that experience lasts until the next time you're coming over. So we did regular calls, regular talks, town halls, but we also had like leadership meetings 3 times a year and one extended leadership meeting once a year, which brought people together, and we encouraged inter-office exchanges. And there's a great example of my colleagues from Sao Paulo and Madrid, because they were dealing with work they had to do in Portuguese and Spanish. So by definition, as we set up the company to work without silos, the two got connected very, very strongly. And one day they came up with an idea and said, well, we actually would like to do an exchange program and have a person from Sao Paulo come to Madrid for a month and swap with the other way around. And I said, oh, that's a great idea. So how do, and they said, we also already have a name for it. I said, oh, so how do you want to call this? We called Spark B&B. I said, bingo, let's go, let's roll. And we did the first one as a proof of concept, and it was a big success. And we rolled it out to the entire company, and so people came to Europe, came to the Americas and to China and everywhere. Dubai, Mumbai, we set up a big collaboration because it was physically not that distant, and plane tickets weren't so expensive, so you could actually set up inter-office exchanges. My colleague Millen from LA set up something like the Sparkapalooza, which was a week of innovation and collaboration, and with a party element to it as well. And that was such a big success, so we exported that across the world. So you got to find those moments, you got to code them, you got to give them a label so that people remember and can revert back to. Remember, we were at our last Finca meeting or at our last Sparkapalooza. We had that, and he was a speaker. And wasn't that a great presentation? And what else? So you got to still connected with your purpose.
Yeah, but it's more than just we saw this during the pandemic, where companies tried to create this sense of engagement, sense of connection with their people. You saw these, happy hours, Zoom, Zoom happy. In reading your book and listening to you talk, you're not talking about just creating these social functions. It's social functions that make people feel connected, feel a part of a common cause. But there's a key element that goes into this, that you use that for the development of the individual, for them to grow. And that's why when you look at this third share, because we've talked about shared understanding, shared behaviors, and if you look at shared purpose, what I was taking, again, tell me if I'm shaping this in the wrong direction. But the shared purpose is not the shared purpose just of what's the purpose of the company. It's the shared purpose of the individual. And the reason I say that is because of the fact you talk about the definition in your book is experience a workplace where people are leading people to achieve what they did not believe is possible.
Yeah.
And I love this, where that you see people greater a lot of times than they see themselves, or what the talent and capabilities could possibly be.
Yeah, I think as a leader, you're constantly faced with a situation where you need to have the right person on the right job. And as I mentioned, often there are constraints. And sometimes opportunities pop up and you can't start hiring for someone because it just takes too long. And the opportunity is here, right here, right now, and you got to find a solution. And what I've experienced during my working career has been that when you give people the trust and empower them to do something based obviously on an assessment that they have the potential to do it, in 9 out of 10, you get great results. You get the result that you want. Sometimes you get even a bit more. You get, in addition, a highly motivated, a highly committed person. But it's not just that person, it's everybody that person influences in their team or in other departments or whatever the structure might be. Now, the question about the individual's purpose versus the corporate purpose is one where I'm not so sure. I think the idea that my personal purpose needs to align with the organization purpose. I mean, there's many organizations who are not even clear about their purpose. And,
yeah.
And many
but when I say that, here's because I spent over 25 years in the executive search industry. My job was to help companies like yours to hire and select and bring people on board. So I watched turnover took place. And I went and looked for people who were in situations where they literally were disconnected in some form or fashion, and be able to move to some place where they get a sense of connection. So if you take that, so I've had a chance to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Which talks about this bottom level, which has to do with security and safety. It has to do more with, have enough money to pay the rent, my physical life. But when that is taken care of, it's that middle part of that pyramid, where if somebody's getting their sense of self-worth, right? That's where they go to. And so purpose might not be, I have a purpose. My stepdaughter's in Cambodia, working with, girls who've been rescued in sex trafficking and working with young people over there. That is her life purpose. And it aligns up with she's building a company. The company's building a translation company, help translate. She's finding jobs for these people, moving in that direction. It centers around kind of her being, with what I got out of this aspect of building a corporate soul. You create an atmosphere where you collect people who their inner being, they feel a sense of self-worth out of what they're doing with their job, and their job can change, but they're getting a sense of self-worth out of it in a profound way. That's when I talk about the individual purpose. And
I agree 100%. I think there's a study from McKinsey that was published, I think in October last year, when this whole topic of the Great Resignation, which I tend to also agree to, the leaders of Microsoft and LinkedIn who call it the Great Reshuffle.
That's a better word. I love it. Nobody said that. I love that word. Yes.
Yeah, it's a much better term, because the McKinsey survey looked at why employees think they are leaving and why employers think that the employees are leaving. And this couldn't be more black and white. So the number one reason why employees are leaving is they're not valued by the organization, or not valued by the manager, or don't feel any sense of belonging. So all the things that you just mentioned that a company with soul provides, actually.
Yeah. And so if you look at this, I love this reshuffling, because of what I've seen is they need to change it from the Great Resignation to the Great Reset. Because one of the things that I've been talking about is the fact that what the pandemic caused is that people were in jobs and they were doing workarounds. It's okay, but I'm not told. The pandemic came in and changed it for people. I'm not doing workarounds anymore, and they're analyzing their current situation, their current circumstance, and it's caused this this shift. And the companies that have flourished in this time literally have this awesome sense of soul, and that's why I was really intrigued whenever I first learned of your book and your studies on this thing, because we usually don't hear the word in corporate America, soul, that's brought in the way you have, but you capture it, and I think and not in a concept, but a practical, actionable process to go through that some big name companies. And you're because I need to, before we lose time, I want you to talk about the Soul Index of companies that are on this, because I was fascinated. You have a list of 20 companies that are in there that are big name companies that are they're fascinating what they've done. What's interesting is you made a comment. Your studies showed that out of the top 20, the large number of companies that were in that list were technology-based companies. And I'm kind of curious, any thoughts that you have on why the technology companies were the predominant force in the Soul Index of top performing organizations?
Yeah, so you're right. I think 60% of the top 20 are tech companies. The youngest is Workday, and the others are like Apple, Microsoft from the 70s. So I think there's one thing with tech companies that I think goes back to the founding days in the 70s and 80s and 90s of these companies, which is that the leaders of these companies already had a strong sense of human capital as the only resource, because obviously there was no manufacturing as such. I mean, it wasn't like automotive or so, where you had the factories and the workers and all of that. It was a different setup. And you look at some of the founders like Benioff from Salesforce, and I've mentioned him a few times in the book, because his approach to everything corporate culture is he's just a role model. You look at the company Adobe that is leading the Soul Index, which was a surprise to me, because Adobe to me was always compared to some other big names on the list, a quiet company. They didn't brag too much about it, I think. And you can look at comparably, where you can compare companies and cultures from real data. And I was like, okay, why is Apple only, I think Apple is 11, yeah, and Adobe number 1? Because in my head, obviously, Apple is so much in the news. And you look at it at comparably, and you compare, and you see the strength of an organization with Adobe. But what's true for the majority of these organizations, because I wanted to find out after having seen the data, is the majority of them have leaders that have been around for a long time. I think the average CEO tenure is like short of 7 years. Here, I think it's short of 9, and the only reason why it's short of 9 is that last year people like Jeff Bezos handed over. Mm-hmm. So otherwise, it would have been 2-digit. So I think that is so critical. But what is important about the Soul Index is it basically is weighted on employee data, because whenever leaders talk to me and say, well, I think we've got a great corporate culture, and I think we also got soul, and my standard response is, well, congratulations, that's great, it's good to hear, but actually, I only believe it when I look into the data that your employees put up on Glassdoor or on other sites like that. Because the only people that can really say whether a company has got soul or not are the people that work in the companies, not the leadership team. The leadership team can create an environment where that corporate culture can flourish and the soul can be built. But the only people that actually have the power to say, yes, we've got a great culture, are the employees. And you see it by the Glassdoor data, you see it by retention data, there's many other data that you can look into.
Yeah. And so when you look at this, when you look at soul is not making sure that you have foosball tables in the lunchroom, and the stuff that was created back when it became so novel, and a wine and happy hour. It was crazy stuff. Because what's interesting is there was a couple of names on your top 20 index that weren't high tech companies. Well, they actually are if you look behind the scenes. It was Costco and IKEA.
Yes.
So tell us, what is it about those two organizations that made them score so high?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, the index is composed by employee data, and that's where they scored so high, and the employee data are about satisfaction, employee satisfaction, employee engagement, and CEO approval. What do the employees think about the CEO? So these three elements make up 75% of the index. So all these companies scored very high on those. And I think IKEA is interesting because it was in Deloitte as well, because there's public companies in the list and there's private companies, and IKEA is a private company. And is probably, when we talk about ESG, a real role model in how they're operating, how they're working with their people. And I was just on an interview with a Scandinavian magazine the other week, and it was interesting. Like the Scandinavian companies, Lego is another example that's in the book, didn't make it into the index, but what these companies are really great at is just making sure that every action they are taking can be brought back to the purpose and to their values. And when any company gets into these situations where you say, well, I go left or go right. Go right might make more business sense, but go left means we're staying true to our purpose, and those companies are then going left. And the credibility that they have is something very unique, and I think from a customer perspective, from consumers, to a certain degree, given the age that we're living in with social media and everything being pretty transparent, culture trumps brand, actually, because people read when companies do not act according to their culture. And I think corporate soul, to me, if you want to put up the question about what's the difference between corporate soul and corporate culture, I'd say every company has a corporate culture. You can't not have a corporate culture. Only few got soul, and those that have soul are living their corporate life with integrity in terms of that their behaviors and actions mirror the strategic foundations of the companies, and people inside the organizations take notice, and as they do, people outside the organizations, all other stakeholders, take notice too.
Betcha. Because what happens is people raise the bar on their output, because I think as we bring this to a close, I think there's an important thing we have to look at, is that this isn't a feel-good exercise. This is a for-profit exercise. This drives straight down to the black on the bottom line.
Absolutely. That's why, to me, it's about driving culture and success is what I call this, put in the subtitle, because the Soul Index companies are highly successful companies, right? I mean, you look at the scores in against the other stock market indices, and on a 5-year basis, it's nearly 200%. And NASDAQ did 180%, which is already stunning and great. And even S&P and Dow Jones were 83 and 75. So everybody was doing good during those 5 years, but companies with soul have done exceptionally well.
Very much so. Well, Ralph, I very much enjoyed this time, and in the show notes, we'll have a link in here that'll show you how to get to your book on Amazon.com, because you're on the bestseller. You're easy to find. You've got a great journey with this. And so, if you look at this, is like what we're talking about is a couple of key aspects of what you've mentioned that I'm going to use to wrap up. And in order to get increase the performance and development of our organizations. We have to make sure that we have buy-in from the people. That's where retention comes from. It comes from our people buying into the mission, the direction, their role in the organization. And the only way that you can have buy-in is have clarity. And to me, what happens when you look at this is that, when you have leaders have to spend time looking about how do you share purpose, how do you share understanding, and how do you focus attention on shared behavior. And those three things is where you bring clarity, which drives productivity, it drives engagement, it drives retention. I'm going to get a little bit esoteric here with you, but I think that what you're writing about here has huge impact on society, because we're not supposed to get our sense of self-worth out of what we do. That psychologists tell us that, but because of my role in the marketplace, I've watched people, including myself, get our sense of self-worth out of what we do. And I think that your message really helps leaders understand that the people that are working for them are choosing to follow them more so now than any other time. I mean, no one can sit there and go, "You're lucky you have a job." No one can say that anymore. And so the people who are choosing to follow you are following you because of the corporate soul that you create, that they get a chance to be a part of. So I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for having me on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
Good. Thanks for joining us today on Lighting the Path, Strategies for Tomorrow's Leaders. If anything in this podcast speaks to you, if I've challenged you, or if you want to spend time digging into this subject a little deeper, or if you disagree with me, reach out. My contact information is on our website, lightingthepath.net, or email me at mike@mikelejeune.com. Also, look for me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect our networks. Keep lighting the path for those who choose to follow you. It's more than a responsibility. It's an honor.